Mauro Prosperi sat alone in an abandoned shrine in the Sahara Desert, 7 days lost. No water, no food, just silence, sand, and the certainty he was going to die. He had been drinking his own urine to survive. He had eaten bats for their blood. But it wasn't enough. His body was breaking down. His mind was collapsing, so he took out his knife and pressed it to his wrists. He was ready to end it, but when he cut, something impossible happened, something that would change everything. This is the story of how a failed suicide became the reason to survive. Let's go back to the beginning. April 1994. Mauro Prosperi was 39 years old. He was an Italian police officer. He was also a pentathlete, an Olympic-level athlete who had competed on the world stage. He was tough, experienced, and prepared. That spring, he entered the Marathon des Sables, known as the toughest footrace on Earth. It's a 6-day, 250-kilometer ultramarathon across the Sahara Desert. Runners carry their own food and gear. They face extreme heat, freezing nights, and endless sand. But Prosperi wasn't worried. Then on day 4 of the race, everything went wrong. A massive sandstorm rolled across the desert. Winds screamed. Sand filled the air like a solid wall. Prosperi stopped, covered his face, and waited for it to pass. When the storm finally cleared, he looked around. The trail markers were gone. The footprints of other runners, erased. He was alone in an ocean of sand with no way to know which direction to go. He tried to navigate by compass and the position of the sun, but in the confusion he went the wrong way. He walked for hours, then ran, then walked again. The temperature climbed to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit during the day. At night, it dropped to near freezing, and within 24 hours his water was gone. Dehydration set in fast. His urine turned dark. His head pounded. His mouth felt like sandpaper. He knew the facts. A human being can survive about 3 days without water in normal conditions. In the Sahara, under extreme heat, that window shrinks to less than a day. So Prosperi made a choice. He started drinking his own urine. It's a known survival technique. Urine is mostly water, especially in the early stages of dehydration. But it's also a psychological line. To drink your own waste is to admit you are beyond all normal help. Still, it kept him alive. Barely. He kept walking, hoping to stumble onto the race route or find some sign of civilization. But there was nothing. Just sand, rock, and silence. He was somewhere in 9 million square kilometers of Sahara Desert, and no one knew where. On day 3 or 4, time was blurring. He saw something on the horizon. At first he thought it was a mirage, but as he got closer, he realized it was real. An abandoned Islamic shrine, called a marabout. It was small, ancient, crumbling, but it offered shelter from the sun and wind. Prosperi staggered inside. It was empty. Dust covered the floor. There was no water, no food. But then he heard something, a high-pitched squeaking, fluttering. He looked up. The ceiling was covered with bats, hundreds of them, hanging in the shadows. Prosperi was starving. His body was eating itself. He had lost over 30 pounds. His thinking was slowing down, but his survival instinct was still there. He reached up, caught a bat with his hands, and killed it. Then he ate it. Raw. He drank its blood for moisture. It was horrible, but it kept him alive. He stayed in the shrine for 2 or 3 days, eating bats, drinking their blood, and waiting for rescue that never came. By day 6 or 7, something inside him started to break. It wasn't the hunger. It wasn't even the thirst. It was the isolation, the complete and total aloneness. He thought about his wife, his children. They had no idea where he was. The race had continued. Search teams had limited resources. He had been missing for nearly a week. They had probably given up. And even if they hadn't, the Sahara is too big. He was a single grain of sand in an endless desert. Prosperi realized he was going to die out here. But the waiting felt worse than dying. Every hour stretched into forever. His body was shutting down. His mind was fracturing. The shrine, which had felt like salvation, now felt like a tomb. He imagined his family never knowing what happened to him, never having closure, just endless questions with no answers. So he made a decision. He would end it on his own terms. Better to die quickly than to slowly waste away in this forgotten place. He took out his knife. He sat down in the dust. He thought of his wife one last time, his children's faces. Then he pressed the blade to his wrists and cut, and he waited to die. But the blood didn't flow. It oozed, slowly, thick, like syrup. 9 days of extreme dehydration had turned his blood into sludge. It wouldn't pour out of his veins. It barely moved. He stared at his wrists, bleeding but not dying. His suicide had failed, not because he changed his mind, but because his body was too broken to even let him die. He sat there in shock, wounded, still alive, and something shifted inside him. Later, Prosperi would say that moment felt like a sign. He was meant to live. The universe, or fate, or simple biology had refused to let him quit. And in that refusal, he found something, a reason. He bandaged his wrists with scraps of cloth, and he decided, if he was going to die, it wouldn't be waiting in this shrine. It would be walking, fighting, moving forward. On day 7 or 8 he left the shrine. He could barely stand. His legs were skeletal. His skin was burnt and cracked, but he walked. He had no destination, no plan. He just moved. Early in the morning before the heat became unbearable, late in the evening as the sun set, he still drank his own urine when he could produce any. He had no food. His body was shutting down, but he kept going. On day 9, he saw something. Structures. Movement. A nomadic Tuareg family had set up camp in the remote southern Algerian desert. Prosperi stumbled toward them, more dead than alive. They saw him, a ghost covered in dirt, blood, and sun damage. They took him in immediately. They gave him goat's milk. He vomited it back up. His stomach couldn't process it. But they cared for him gently, rehydrating him slowly, and eventually transported him to an Algerian military outpost. When officials measured, they realized Prosperi had traveled nearly 200 kilometers off course. He was in a completely different country. The search teams had been looking in Morocco. He was in Algeria. He had been given up for dead. Prosperi spent time in the hospital. He had lost 16 to 18 kilograms, about 35 to 40 pounds. He had liver damage, severe dehydration, but he was alive, and over the following weeks, he recovered. Fully. He returned to Italy. He held his wife and children again. They had feared the worst. But he had survived, not through luck, not through rescue, through a single decision made in the darkest moment of his life, the decision to keep walking after deciding to quit. Prosperi's story forces us to ask a hard question. What keeps us going when everything is gone? In that shrine, he had every logical reason to give up. No water, no food, no rescue coming. He was 200 kilometers from where anyone was looking. The physical pain was unbearable, but the psychological pain was worse. The loneliness, the certainty that he would die unknown and forgotten. When he cut his wrists, he was making a rational choice based on unbearable suffering. But when the suicide failed, he had a choice. He could have tried again. He could have laid down and waited. But instead, he chose to interpret that failure differently. He chose to see it as a message, a reason to continue. Survival stopped being a reflex and became a decision. That's the part of this story that stays with you. Prosperi didn't find water. He didn't stumble onto rescuers. He just decided that his struggle still had meaning, that his story wasn't finished, and that decision gave him the strength to stand up, leave the shrine, and walk into a desert that had already tried to kill him. Years later, Prosperi would return to the Marathon des Sables. He would run it again. The desert that nearly destroyed him didn't break him. It revealed something inside him, something we all have but rarely need to access. The ability to choose hope when hope makes no sense. We don't know what we're capable of until everything else is stripped away. Until comfort, safety, and certainty are gone. Prosperi found out, and what he discovered was simple and profound. Survival is not about strength or skill or preparation. Sometimes it's just about deciding that the struggle still means something. Mauro Prosperi walked out of the Sahara because he chose to believe his story wasn't over. That decision, in the end, was the only one that mattered.